You want an angle that is going to pick up the other piece of wood, but you don't want it busting out the end. You want it sort of going in and staying in like that. But you want it sort of back from the edge so it doesn't split. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com. I thought I would show you how I slap together one of these garden boxes. I get lots of questions about garden boxes, how big they should be, what size they should be, how high they should be, blah, 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 blah. And for me, any higher than 6 inches is basically a waste of material. I like 6 inches because I feel it, I get it a little bit above grade. It tends to rain here, so it's, you know, there's an advantage to being a little bit above grade. But if you go too high, you're basically moving your plants away from where the water is in the ground, right? So as long as you can bend over and kneel and do all those sorts of, you don't have the mobility issues, as close to the ground as possible is good. I like 6 inches because, let's say the soil in the box is maybe 3 inches above grade, you'll still have another 3 inches to contain various mulches you might put in your garden to sort of keep them from blowing away. So, I mean, if you watch my videos, I mulch everything and I use all kinds of different materials. Some things really don't move around too much, like I find hay really doesn't move around at all. But leaves certainly do, and you know, depending on what you use, you may have that issue as well. So I watch a lot of videos on how people do this, and it tends to be very complicated, costly with regard to materials, overbuilt, overdone. I mean, really, you don't even need the box, right? It's just I like having a sort of defined space and a certain geometry in my garden. It's really got nothing to do with the plants. Also, it sort of tells me where to walk and where not to walk, and just helps me organize the space in my mind and helps me plan out my garden. So I like to have some sort of definition to where I'm walking and where I'm growing. But it doesn't need to be anything particularly sophisticated. And also, I mean, if it's made of wood, it's going to rot. So there's no point spending a lot of money. You can see in the background here, I got a bunch of lumber. And these are all, I got that at a lumber yard, and they're what's called seconds. It's the lumber that's got, you know, some kind of imperfection. This board right here is an imperfection. It various imperfections on them. Or there may be a little bit of a bend or a little bit of a wow in it or a little bit of a warp or whatever. But, you know, it's just relatively straight and relatively sound. It's certainly good enough for a garden box, right? It's going to be worm food eventually, or firewood or whatever. So, but sometimes they'll be half price or 1/3 price. So it's better to buy something like that, in my opinion. I also, you know, my preference is a rough cut that's completely dimensional, like 2 inches by 6 inches, but that can be hard to come by. So this is just milled lumber. They're basically studs. They're not even a full 8 feet. They're designed to be like part of a wall in a house, slightly shorter than 8 feet. To account for the studs that go on either end. I'm getting too detailed here, who cares? Anyway, these are cheap and they work and they're half price and they're called seconds. I'm doing this video for the person that really doesn't know anything about carpentry, wants to build a box, doesn't want to pay someone to do it, wants to sort of figure it out on their own. And to that effect, I'm only using the most basic tools. This is a dollar store square. You're going to need something like this to make a straight line. I've got all the sophisticated stuff in my garage. I got a chop saw, I got all that sort of stuff. But you know, even if I wasn't filming this video right now, to just make one box, I mean, if you're mass producing, of course you use your equipment, but I tend to do this in little dribs and drabs and pieces. Just, you know, I have an hour right now before lunch. I got to help, you know, with my kids at lunchtime, so I got about an hour to play with. I don't have time to run power cords out here and get all geared up. But I do have enough time with basic tools to slap a box together. And I also like it because it's quiet and you know, it's just more peaceful. It doesn't bother your neighbors and that sort of thing. So I mean, all I'm using here is like a $20 handsaw and a dollar store square and a hammer. It's an East Wing, but you can use any sort of hammer you want. Pencil, tape measure, and got these nails. I think they're 3.5 inch common ungalvanized nails. I mean, this is going to be outside, and some people would say you should use galvanized nails, you should use screws, and so on and so forth. Nails are way faster, and if you use the ungalvanized ones, they'll rust when you nail them into the wood. And that there's a car going by here. I'm in my driveway here. They'll rust when you put them into the wood, and the rust will help them almost weld them or rust into place. They will not rust out before the wood rots. I mean, it would take decades for a nail like this to rust out, right? So they're going to rust a little bit, and that'll help hold the nail in place in the wood and keep it from slipping. And that's all you really need. You don't need fancy miter joints or anything special like that. And I've played with different things like that, but this is the basic thing I do because it's fast and it's cheap and it's effective. 3 nails in every corner and slap together. So let me just walk you through my process here. I think I've got a good camera angle here, and I'll move it around as I go. But let me just walk you through the process. So these are all the same length. So the first thing I got to do is cut one of them in half to be the front, sort of the end parts, right? The narrower part, right? These are about 8 feet long, so it's going to be 8 by 4, and that's a really good dimension, generally speaking, for a garden bed. It's narrow enough that you can reach the middle, and it's not long enough that it's a pain to walk around, right? So I even decided to work on this from the point of view that maybe you don't have a sawhorse and you're really not set up for this sort of work, right? Maybe you don't really do any carpentry, you just have a garden. And you don't want to buy anything. You want to basically buy the bare minimum you need to build a garden. So the first thing you got to do is find the middle of this board. And I could measure the length of the whole thing and divide by 2, but it's actually a lot easier. Even that I find tends to be a little problematic, especially for novices. So the first thing you got to do is find the middle of this thing. So let's just measure the full length of it, and it's about 93. It's just shy of 93, but I'm just going to use that. The technique I'm going to use here, you don't have to, understand 1/16 of an inch or half an inch or quarter inch or all that sort of stuff. This is a very crude method that works perfectly. It's around 93, and half of 93 is like 46 and a half, right? So I'm going to make a mark where 46 and a half is, and then I'm going to measure from the other end. Make a mark where 46 and a half is. And as you might expect, those 2 marks aren't in the same place because I'm doing this very crude. All right, you see my 2 marks here? I just did a quick crude measurement because you don't have to think this through too much. It doesn't matter. You're not building an airplane, right? You're just building a box that's relatively square. So these are my 2 measurements from either end. So I just basically split the difference and make my line on that. And for something like this, that's totally a fine way to find the actual middle. And then I just cut so that my saw blade is removing all of the lead from this line, and I should have this thing evenly divided. Let's cut it in half and see how close I am to getting each side the same. You notice I have it over these boards here, and I'll do a little trick as I get closer to cutting through it, but let's just do it right now. I'm going to move this one back a bit so that it's underneath, but not, so I got a little, kind of like a makeshift crude sawhorse. If you got something that's heavy, put it at the end over there. I'm just going to put a stump on the end over there to hold it in place. So, I mean, of course, if you got someone that can give you a hand, just get them to help you hold it, but I'm out here alone right now. I normally get my kids to help me with this sort of thing. Anyway, I got a stump waiting down the other end there, so it's like having a small person standing on it. I'm holding this with my hands, and as I'm cutting, I'm basically making sure that I'm looking down at the top of the saw and making sure it's not tipped this way or that way, right? I'm trying to make, basically in my line of sight, I'm trying to make sure the saw is there's as little of the blade showing as possible, and that way I can, to as much extent as possible, ensure that it's not tipped one way or the other. And at the same time, I'm trying to keep it lined up with this line, right? So we just start. This saw cuts on the push, so I only really have to. I'm not pushing down. I'm more like holding it, keeping the whole thing from going this way. All right. So you're just relaxed and letting the saw do the work. establish the line. Get the line as straight as you can. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Alright, so now I've got basically a track for the saw to go in. I don't have to be too focused on keeping the saw straight. This wood will hold the saw straight because I've got it established. So now I can focus more on just giving good solid strokes. You don't want to do like little things like this. A lot of novices do these little short strokes. Do a long stroke. That's what a saw is made to do, is cut teeth all along the length of it. And that's because you're supposed to do a long stroke. Far more efficient that way. And whatever you do, don't dig your teeth into the gravel if you're doing this in a driveway. Alright, so that's all the cutting we need to do. We're done with the saw. Oh, and just to measure, let's see how close we got to perfection here. I'll even them up at the end here. It's pretty darn close. It's not a perfect cut, but it's pretty darn close. Certainly good enough. Certainly good enough for what we're doing here. Alright, so now we got that part done. And now it's time to basically put the box together. And you can see I've got a certain configuration, a certain setup here. I've got some pieces of wood on the ground. And that is to, you know, this surface is uneven, so it's to make it level. The best thing to do if you have a garage with a flat concrete floor is just do it on the flat concrete floor. And that'll basically keep everything relatively true and consistent. But when you're nailing like this, if you don't have someone to help you, or a number of people to help you, you need something to keep the thing you're nailing into from moving. So I'm going to be nailing in from the ends over here. And the main reason I'm doing this video is to explain this to people that have never done this before. It can be a bit tricky if you don't know a couple little tiny tricks that make it easy and make it quick. You need a wall, something to put the thing against so you can nail into it and it won't go that way, right? I'm going to be nailing this way and it's going to be against this pile of wood here. That's why you see I have a piece of wood here. That's so the end of my box will not go that way while I'm nailing on it from that side there. Let me show you what I mean right now. Here's my two ends. One over here and one over here. These are my two sides. And you can see there's a pretty good imperfection right here, right? That's why it is, you know, $3 a piece sort of thing, right? That's fine. I'll put that on the bottom, basically. The side that's facing up won't show that. That's another thing when you're using imperfect lumber, you want to see where all the imperfections are and get them on the side that's going to be the bottom, right? So that way, that's just one more thing to think about. No one will even notice if you care about that, but also if there's a real imperfection, you don't want a splinter or something digging into you when you're working there, or your kids or other people that are in your garden. So I think I've got basically the best side facing up here. Move this out a little bit. Better a bit too. And I get that width right. Close enough. Okay, let me move the camera a little bit closer. You can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I got the other end together, and I'm going to put this one in and show you sort of what I've been talking about here. But try not to block the camera view, but you want an angle that is going to pick up the other piece of wood, but you don't want it busting out the end. You want it sort of going in and staying in like that. But you want it sort of back from the edge so it doesn't split the end of this piece of wood. So you want it to nail it in so it kind of goes in like that, right? And this gets easier as you practice it. And it's a lot easier if you're standing over it and looking down on it. I think that angle's good. Okay, so that's grabbed. I can sort of make a couple little adjustments. Drive her home. Let's do another one here. Hoping I'm not blocking the camera angle. That'll be good, I think. Do a couple hits like that, check it, a couple more hits, check it. Okay, I think we can drive her in. Then we do a middle one a little closer to the end. Just for good measure. Okay, so now I got to flip this whole thing over and do the other end. If you're asking what I'm doing to keep this square, I'm using the close enough method, which is that if it looks close enough, it's close enough. I'm not holding up a bridge here, right? It doesn't matter. As long as it looks square, it should be square enough. The whole thing's going to move around a little bit anyway. And normally when I actually place this in the garden, I do a couple little, what they call 3, 4, 5 kind of geometry test to make sure it's relatively square. But I mean, basically, if it looks square, it's square. This isn't structural. Alright, so you saw how fast the other end went together. That's basically how long I can slap one of these together in about 5 minutes, maybe 10 once I got this sort of rig set up. 10 at the most, maybe 5 minutes when I'm really going. So that doesn't take long. Right, so I mean I got about $10 worth of lumber here, $5 worth of time, and this will probably last, I don't know, anywhere from 5 to 10 years depending on a range of variables that affect the rotting time of spruce lumber. Anyway, you know, it's together, it's sound. There's all kinds of different kits they sell and things like that, but you don't need any of that. You need 3-inch nails, 3.5-inch nails, a hammer, a square, a saw, pencil, and the wood. That's all you need. So I hope that maybe inspired you to give it a try. If you're paying people to do your carpentry for you, I'm not saying you're a carpenter now that you've done this, but you know, if you're overwhelmed or you have anxiety about doing this on your own, you're inclined to pay someone to do it, and that's fine if that works for you. Or if you're finding the cost prohibitive or whatever, and if you like having wooden boxes in your garden and you don't want the fanciest boxes in the world, you just want boxes that work. This is a box that works. Everything I got in my garden I basically slapped together like this. Doesn't take long. And it works really well. Yes, I'm sure I'm going to get comments. You should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. I can't think of a faster, cheaper way to slap a box together than this. It's good to have little braces in the corners to shore them up, but those nails will hold the corners together just fine, especially, you know, within a few months they'll sort of rust a little bit, and they'll hold it together, and they're not going to rust away. They're too big and they're too heavy to rust away. I mean, I've got drywall screws which are pretty small compared to a 3.5-inch common nail in my garden that are holding things together, that have been there for years and years and years. It takes a long time under certain conditions for metals to sort of rust away to nothing. They tend to retain their strength for quite a long time, and those nails will last. The life of those nails will go beyond the length of the life of this box for sure. I hope you found that interesting, and it gave you the confidence to maybe try making a box or two this year if that's what you want. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com, and until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.